Welcome to Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balzerzak. Each episode will explore the passions, expertise, and real-world experiences of security leaders who are helping the future of data security and governance. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To learn more about our AI-powered data security platform, please visit centra.io. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Guardians of the Data. My guest today has over 3 decades of experience across IT and cybersecurity. Currently a security consultant and president of the Charlotte ISSA, Brent Bigelow. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thanks, Ward. Glad to be here.
You know, in that intro, I didn't want to age you too much, so I kept it at 3 decades. But anybody that goes and looks you up, they'll see a little bit more than that. You've been in the industry for a while now.
Yeah, it's leading towards almost 4.
Oh, you said it. You said it. So at least you exposed that. But yes, many, many years. Excited to have you here. So Brent, in your professional opinion, what's the biggest data security challenge that organizations are facing?
You know, I think it's an age-old one, and I always get pauses from people, but unstructured data. It's like asset management, right? It's not been solved. It continues to grow, and I had a wonderful. I get together in several CISO groups, but yesterday, everyone was talking about things. There were about 37 CISOs in the room, and it was all these different things. And I said, we still haven't solved for what I call the simple things like asset management. How can you protect what you don't know you have? Unstructured data. And they all threw up the mantras of, not all of them, but AI was a common theme, right? Well, so we don't know, is AI like eating all this unstructured data, and consuming it? It's just a funny conversation to watch people go, that's a good point.
Unstructured data is definitely the Wild West, right? Definitely the Wild West. And just, I guess, to clarify, when you say unstructured data, you're not necessarily, or maybe you are. I actually ask instead of assuming. When you say unstructured data, are you talking about storage, unstructured, database versus file server, or the data itself?
So yes, it can be anything that the organization hasn't addressed formally as their data. And that's unstructured. And, I always mention to people, I have a lot of experience through Fortune 20 on down businesses with merger and acquisition. And with that, you just get tons of unstructured data. And for a while it's pulled in and put somewhere, but no one really gives it a look over or sees what it's all about, goes through it, too time consuming, but it could be that next big breach.
I would say it's likely already been, right? We see data breaches all the time. Granted, I think a lot of the recent ones have probably been structured just based on, how the articles are written and stuff.
And that's because you're threat actors, right?
Yeah.
They're going after what you know. If it's a happy occurrence to find that unstructured data and they go, whoa, gold mine. It's one of those things. And, we used to do some penetrations into our new environments when we acquired them. And we'd look for that because, I don't want to know what you know. You're telling me this is our gold, but what's the legacy gold that may still be, of value or could be detrimental to the company? It's something that should be on a risk register or somewhere like that.
I like it. I like it. So obviously, you described an ocean of an issue here, right? Unstructured data. So, I think, right, you do a lot of M&A type of work. So I'm really curious your thoughts on how do we start to solve for that? Because it's a big, big problem.
Well, it is. And it's the reason it's still there because it continues to grow. And not every business. I love it when people go shadow IT, but what about shadow business? They're storing data in different places, and you don't know the value of it, because no one really, the data owners, they go, okay, yeah, this is, something specific to our business. And then word leaves and someone goes, I don't know what that is. We just, let's keep it around just in case.
Don't delete it. Who knows? It might be the secret, recipe to whatever. Yeah.
It's the secret sauce for Coca-Cola,
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
Mexico version, the good one. Um, but yeah, so that's it. And I have not seen a company yet, and like I said, I've been in all different size companies that wanted to truly crack that mystery and dig in, put together a project, and let's identify all this. And the other side of it is, and this statement was yesterday brought up. CEOs are saying, "I don't care. I want you using AI."
Yep.
So if you are one of those, people that either is an owner of unstructured data or, inherited it, how are you going to keep that from getting ingested? And then knowing what's in there. I don't know. Discovery hasn't come up a whole lot yet. But there's so much unknown in unstructured data. That's why I think it's just such a great one to noodle on, because you can't get your hands around it. You can't measure it, but it's growing. And that's the beauty of it. It's like, well, the ocean's going up because stuff's melting. Well, unstructured data is no different. It continues to grow, and you never see people cutting storage on data that they don't know. They just add in some more gigs or terabytes,
Or petabytes these days.
petabytes. They just let it continue to grow and grow. So that's why I chose that one. And I thought about this before we got together, because I was like, this may be a really good one. And I don't know if it's come up for you in the past, but I think it's awesome.
No, not specifically shadow data. And oh, by the way, I want to recognize, I think you coined a new phrase and I like it. You said shadow business, right? Like,
Shadow business, my lexicon.
yeah, well, one more, although we might start going the way of like all the various acronyms out there these days, right? They just add a new letter to the front or replace a letter, and now it's a new thing. Like we've got shadow IT, we've got shadow SaaS, shadow repository, shadow data, and now shadow business. I love it. Shadow business is included.
And everyone throws the monikers on, the groups like IT and stuff, as if, they're the owners, or they're the ones making the bad decisions all the time, or doing something that they shouldn't be just to make it happen as an enabler. The business does the same thing. If you give them resources, they'll use it in any manner that they can. And I'm not saying it's the wrong thing. They're their own enablers, but shadow business is legit. It does happen. In the old days, we would have business units that would hire their own IT resources to manipulate the resources they had available. And that's where, we used to say, yeah, they got some shadow IT folks in here, but it was actually shadow business, and no one ever hung that name on them. So
I think that's the perfect way to describe it for sure. So, M&A, regular organizations, everybody's got this problem. Certainly every organization that I've worked for, I've always kind of said, like, nothing's easy in security, right? It's why we're all here. It's why we've kind of been able to make a career of this. Um, but when it comes to data security, I've always kind of thought, at least from a discovery perspective, generally speaking, again, listeners, generally speaking, nobody needs to reach out and say that I'm wrong, but generally speaking, structured repositories are a little bit easier to get your arms around because, again, generally speaking, if architected correctly, you can look at, column headers, table names. You can get a feel for what is or what should be within that database, that application, whatever. Unstructured, again, generally speaking, there is no rhyme or reason. There are few rules that organizations put into place. And let's be honest, it's super simple for users to create a document, Word document, Excel, whatever, and toss it somewhere. And now it's adding to that ocean of data. So do you have any tips or tricks that you've brought to organizations, M&A or not, on what to do, right? How to get their arms around it?
You know, yeah, in the form of policy, because we can only set up some guardrails, but we can't force them to do it. Horse to the water, however you want the analogy to go. But we say, hey, here, this is for the good of the organization, and this is good for you as a business unit. You move on. You don't want to have to go through all this data and transition it. You also don't want to violate policy and take it with you. And if we're doing our job on the security side, you may lose access to that data because it's in a share that you no longer need to have access to. So all of a sudden, privilege wins out and you don't. And you go, well, I used to have that somewhere. And over time, these things escape us. So, I think policy driven is a stake in the sand where you can go, okay, hey, everybody, from this point forward, I'm the new sheriff, but here's what we want to do for the good of the company. And we want to have our data in these specific areas, these specific formats as it relates. Do not save it off as something else. Don't go, oh, I can probably work on this later. And you just happen to have your own flavor of a Dropbox or something. You're just going to throw it there for the time being, those sorts of things. Or even the company one, and you go, well, I'll put my own email here so I can log in from home. All these cringeworthy type of things, because users they're clever. They are so clever. As being their own enabler to be able to work when they need to compensate for using up time somewhere else. So yeah, policy driven, like I said, to put it out there so that there's some, potential controls, because I don't think, when things are provisioned out, there's ironclad enough to prevent a user from throwing stuff in a share that's done a specific way. I don't think there's, any DLP specifically that's mature in any place that I've been that I'd go, wow, I couldn't even create anything, and not have it flagged as, this type of data. It just doesn't exist. And legacy, that's out the door. So when you're a 30-year person, you've got all the architecture for where the bodies are buried in your possession, and you carry it with you. And I've never seen handoff. I've seen people be so tight-fisted, when they lose access, they could be at a point where they don't care, they're leaving, or they get irate, and then you go, so tell me about this data. I'd like to learn some more. But in the IT world, for instance, do you really have time to go through it and go, hey, business unit, where do you want to put this stuff? It just doesn't happen. So I think we're our own worst enemy. But at least you have something. E-discovery pops up, and they go, oh, look at this. You go, well, we have a policy that says that shouldn't happen, and at least you have something. You're not trying to claim ignorance.
Agreed, agreed. And as I think through, I've been around the last 20, and certainly you got a few more years on me, so you've seen this grow. Go back, 20 to 15 years when it comes to like file servers, and generally speaking, a folder structure was created, and you couldn't modify that, right? So it'd be like company, org, and then maybe departments, and then under there is again the Wild West. You could create various departmental folders, but you kind of had your data there. Fast forward you don't have to fast forward too far, but fast forward a little bit. Think about SharePoint, certainly now Teams. Like, I worked for an organization. Every single project, for whatever reason, had its own Teams repository. And that's where they stored everything. And within said Teams repository, you had multiple folders. Now, what happened when that project ended? I truly don't know. I don't know if they archived that off and placed it somewhere else, but I'm sure it was there for a long time, unless somebody, to the point you made earlier, actually grabbed a document and moved it somewhere else, and now they moved it with them. So, like the proliferation just of um, file storage, I guess, structure, I think has started, a lot of this craziness, and a lot of organizations do not want to put in a governance structure, to say like, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do data sensitivity based storage, only put confidential and confidential. Like years ago, that was the way they did it. It's kind of dead, I feel like. Are you seeing that as well out there?
Yeah, data classification hasn't changed. I think the main things, it's internal use only, it's confidential or public, and there's some, you know, minor flavors of those in between. It just depends. But those are kind of the big ones, or the header types of data classification that I always see, and it's either it's open to everybody, it's open to nobody, or there's a specific group that can see some of the data in between. And once again, it doesn't have a specific separation. I do believe there's certain compliance and stuff that drives people to put things in certain places, but financially, your files are in the cloud. They're going to go, hey, you got a lot of stuff right here. Can we move it to a cheaper blob storage? And all of a sudden, it goes to cold storage, and it's getting backed up, but we kind of know it's backed up, but we don't know exactly where that sits. And you mentioned SharePoint. I don't think it's as bad as it was, but maybe it is. There used to be, every business unit had a SharePoint architect on staff that would create their SharePoint,
I
all their
remember,
file
yeah.
storage. It was like a position that someone would wear two hats in some cases in the larger companies. And I even went through that in early stages of where I was like, you want me to do what? And it's like, well, it's a little web design, but it's that file structure. And what you do is you just create the high level, and then the people would take it from there. And all these inherited, well, this person can't get to it. I need them to get to this. All of a sudden, give them access from here down. And if it's signed off on and there's a ticket to support it, great. It was all quote within policy at that time, but they could get into data that maybe it went past their tenure at the company, and then someone else inherited it. It's just a crazy thing that I believe is still the same. But yeah.
You and I are dating ourselves a bit on that one, sir. The idea of the SharePoint architect, man, yeah, I I'm thinking back a couple jobs now, like that was absolutely a thing, right? I would go to, Bob and say, "Hey, Bob, I need this thing done," and bing, bang, boom, he knew how to do it because that was either to your point, a portion or his full job. Um, Thinking more recent though, probably the last organization I worked for, that wasn't the thing, right? Somebody, if they wanted to, just set up a new SharePoint site, and it was good to go. So yeah, hey, SharePoint architects, if you're out there, how you doing? You still getting work? It's man, that's crazy. But yeah, I think when they were around, they could at least employ a structure and kind of enforce a structure and enforce certain things, And yeah, if they've evaporated, which kind of seems like they've have, right? I think Microsoft has made SharePoint adoption a lot easier. We're talking a lot about Microsoft, but insert any name there, right? Google, whatever, like it's all the same. Um, they've made it so easy to consume that now your layman, right, the person you hire just off the street as an entry level individual, is able to create whatever the heck they want.
Yeah, it is a ServiceNow ticket. For example, in a lot of organizations, I need a SharePoint site, and it may get set up and then it's turned over to you and it's all yours. And in the architect days, we went to some decent training, and it taught us enough about what we were doing and the different roles that could be assigned, and you're off to the races. But that's not the case. It's turned over to the business unit, and it's a have at and kind of walk away, and then here's how much storage you have. Isn't this funny how it took us down this path with just unstructured?
Right, right, and we're talking a lot about what some people may actually call, some people may argue that, SharePoint's really more of a semi-structured type of environment the way it is. It's not the same as, some of the data lakes that are out there and whatnot, which again, some folks would call unstructured. So now we even have various flavors of unstructured out there, and unstructured repositories with unstructured data just completely continues to pile on. Kind of going back a little bit, you had talked about, kind of, I'm going to call it duplicate data, right? People grabbing something, storing it local, whatever. Um, I think that's really becoming a problem as well. It's been a problem for a long time, but I feel like in today's day and age, where just about every organization I talk to has got some form of Copilot they are implementing or have implemented, it's exposing this problem, right? They do a search, they get back 20 results, and 18 appear to be the same, but what's the right one, right? What's the accurate data? It's making it's garbage in, garbage out, right? To use that old analogy, right? You got all this data feeding into your Copilot, your AI, your what have you, and you're not always getting back the results that you would like.
Correct. Yeah, there's no deduping and version control, all those things, consider the source. And if on your back end, you have countless people feeding that in the use of their AI, and like you said, the same files, but maybe there's just a minor change. It's at the checksum level. I don't know that, in ingesting those into these language models, um, if there's anything that kind of goes deep enough to the checksum level to go, well, this file is different than this one. Size is the same, name's the same as we look at it, but could it go further to decide which one we'd consider system of record opposed to someone just kind of tweaking it around, and all of a sudden, it could taint the data, not intentionally, but it could happen.
Or who, right? Who is the last person to touch it? Maybe you've got a policy admin that they are the source of record, but Ward went in and said, "Hey, now you can do whatever you want on the internet instead of, keep it business related." Now, who do I listen to? The policy admin or Ward that says, go bonkers, do whatever you want?
Love it. Yeah. Yeah, because we don't know, and everyone's moving so fast, and I'm quick to acknowledge we move so fast, and that's always been a common theme through the years. But we're just looking at ways to accelerate and get more stuff done now with less, and there's less of that look back. We're not doing the look back that maybe we did at one time for accuracy, because it's accurate, but is it precise? It's that age old discussion of, well, I think it is. Is it good enough? Yeah, it passed muster. No one really said anything, and it got the point across, and it gave us what we needed. But was it 100%, precise? So that's data quality, right? And you just said it, garbage in, garbage out. Well, what if our data is not total garbage? Is just becoming that?
Yeah, or, I had another guest on, episode has already aired, but, they were talking about the idea of, in the day and age of AI, real human created data is starting to go the way of the dodo, right? Now we got a lot of synthetic data being created, AI is generating it, and, um, kind of the summary there is we should be concerned about it, right? Because, the more and more you've got bad data feeding it, the more and more bad data is getting generated, and now just this mountain, right, is getting created that, really starts to poison the AI models at that point.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing you bring up. I see it in email a lot where I'll get a summary of what the email says. It's an interpretation. And, you know, if it's a email's never been something that unless you're really sharp or you know the person outside of the loop, if it's angry or not, if it's all caps, obviously that's a given. But if that person you read it and you go, yeah, I kind of read the anger in that one. Well, you're not going to get that from AI ingestion or summarizing. And I see those little summary um, windows that come up or boxes that are in the email telling me what it's about. I was like, sometimes it's spot on. Other times it's like that's so wrong. That's not even close.
I've started ignoring those personally because I too have found the same.
Well, it's for interest's sake. I just started seeing it and I go, hmm, let's put a little into it and go, let's see how often they're right or how badly they're wrong. And because it's going to translate, right? If that's email, data itself, when is having access to it, and I look at it as, a hungry monster chewing on data. How are they digesting it? And or how is it being digested? And I get more curious because we have no way to dedupe or I don't think conceptually right size data within our AI architecture that I'm aware of. I just don't know if it exists.
Probably not yet, right? We're probably getting there again. AI is not new, right? None of this is new, but certainly, I'm sure, like yourself, ISSA meetings, other conferences you go to, like you cannot go down any hallway or even into the bathroom of a conference and not hear something about AI. Um, and I'll tell you, I get tired of it. I try to tell folks, like, "Let's stop talking about it," and, like, "Yeah, we're bored of it," and then we talk about it some more. Um, but it's, it is becoming the thing, and, to your point, like, there are probably going to be brand new products, hitting the market or already there just in stealth that will start to address some of those AI problems that are, springing up for the first time, essentially.
And what do you see with that statement you just said? How does that translate in your mind to history repeating itself?
It is cyclical, right? It is cyclical how all this works, and it's it's interesting, and for me, it's interesting because really everything we do, just about everything we do, at least in security, goes back to data, right? And if you take security out of the mix and say just about everything we do in business translates back to data, unless you're in, a power industry or something like that, where you're providing a service back to the industrial base, like data is what you have. It's what you're creating. It's your intellectual property. So, um, yeah, it is. It is very interesting to see what is happening with, human versus AI, systems growing. Now you've got AI versus AI, right? AI creating AI. And no, we're not talking about Skynet. We're talking about, agentic AI and everything it's doing there. Um, it is very interesting to see, bringing it back to data security, how um, you still need the human to be able to say, is this right? Should we be doing this thing with that data? and how can I properly secure it? So I like the analogy you used. AI doesn't, gobble it up and digest it in a way that I don't want it to, or maybe I don't want it to eat that thing. It's crazy, crazy times we live in. So let's talk about that. So Brent, you have been in the industry. You self-exposed, so I'm going to use it now. You've been in the industry almost 40 years at this point. You have been around the block a couple times, right? Couple times. What's your journey been? Where did you start? How did you get to where you are today?
Great question. So pre-internet, right? Pre-cell phones, it was a whole different existence of, computers were like this cool thing people talked about, like AI, right? And if you were one of the early adopters, you had one, you had a modem, and then you started talking with other people, and they go, "Hey, have you checked out these bulletin boards?" And it's like, "No, tell me more." And they were repositories of data and, all kinds of stuff. And it was just amazing. It was just like this open door. And that's where I think the fever set in for me. It was like, okay, I need more. And I was very good at getting into bulletin boards in the early days. Um, it was I was a pattern guy, and I was a whiz for figuring some things out. And there were no controls in discussion or protections that were really put into place. I mean, default passwords, all this kind of stuff, and it led me to go, well, that's not good. And as, things progressed and, I learned the mainframe world and, that was it's kind of its own existence within certain companies. You didn't have to go outside anywhere or connect via modem to access data. You had it all right there. And supporting that and, making sure that that kind of identity management that existed way back then existed. And, there are people who used to argue there's a certain component of AI in those old worlds. And I don't totally disagree. It's just, you'd say, expand on that. So it was pretty cool. But that led me forward. And, IT turned into information security because we were just doing it. We were just learning to secure things to prevent stuff from happening. Then there was this uh, spyware that started cropping up and different kinds of adware and stuff, and people clicked on the wrong thing. All of a sudden, your page filled up with all these pictures that you don't want to tell your support guy just came up on their screen, and you're like, what did you do? So it was that kind of progression, and it just lit a fire. And I was in the early uh, cloud adoption and virtualization and all those things, and it was the making stuff work because a lot of things didn't exist, like drivers and stuff like that. And many of the tasks that we did were command line. So we were essentially programming in a lot of different ways and scripting and doing all sorts of things to accomplish, a task to do something faster or less keystrokes or, within network architecture, well, we want to go ahead and block this kind of traffic. And, OSI model was something we talked about often. Then in came encryption, and it was just like all this stuff took shape around you, but it wasn't like it wore you down. It was like, oh, cool, I can do this now. So problems were being solved that needed to be, but nothing was unleashed. And it was like we were all growing, but now you have this very mature thing with internet and everything that we take for granted today. And now you layer AI on to make things easier, to speed things up, get rid of mundane tasks. Well, we pay SOC people to do this kind of stuff. We'll just have AI do it, and then we'll make that progression to where things move to another layer or a different skill set of individual. Maybe it's not a layer thing any longer. It's a person that can address that particular finding that SOC AI discovers, and they do it more quickly, and then maybe there's some orchestration or something that gets it into Ward's hands, and then he can run with it and go, oh yeah, this is something we need to escalate, or I need to do this, and we shut down the endpoint, that type of stuff. So but it's just morphed itself, and you heard me say shadow business. Well, all these lexicons continue to build. We're in cybersecurity now. I have no idea what it's going to be next, because it was information security that had a good run for a long time. Depending on the person you talk to, they still reference information security in some aspects of things. But cybersecurity is truly taking on the life that everyone recognizes. I remember we were trying to figure out, how do we spell it? Is it one word, two words? Do we capitalize security as well as cyber? It was so
I
fun.
think we're still trying to figure that out. Every time I type it, I'm like, oh man, 2 words, 1 word, what are we doing here?
Yeah, it's always different, and it depends. And I have global teams, and their versions of cybersecurity, they have their own idea of what it should read like, and that's what I would get. So rather than correct anything or say, hey, why do you do it that way? I was just like, whatever, it's all good. It says the same thing. So
Right.
that's what really kept me, driving forward, and gave me some of the greatest experience. I always reference it, and I hate this statement, but I remember growing up, I used to hear people telling me, well, I forgot more than you'll ever know. And we forget a lot about our travels, but it's those things that inspire us, or the people. I used to say, and I still do, I walked with giants. At the time, we were just trying to figure stuff out. But you get here, and like I showed you that book, and you showed me yours. Eric Cole. I remember the early days, and he was just a cool dude. Whit Diffie. We had him come into town, and he did a presentation for us, and he had on like he was out of Montana, just got off a horse, suede jacket with the fringes on it and everything, and a hat, cowboy hat. It was just the coolest thing to see these people. Bruce Schneier, right? All these iconic names now. Back then, we were just people chatting about stuff.
I'm really curious, right? You've been doing this for a while. I like to ask this question of some of my guests. I definitely want to ask it of you. So if you could talk to a younger you, is there anything that you would have done different, or any way you would have pushed the younger you to take a slightly different path?
I think there's a couple of roles that I had that I probably would have transitioned sooner,
Mm,
because I always had an appetite, and I dig in hard, and it impacted some things with family, because we're 7 by 24. There is no getting away, and I was at different events of my kids, usually on a conference call with one of my West Coast or global folks, or working an incident. I'd make it to the event, but I wasn't totally there, so I might have separated, and I destroyed my health multiple times
mm,
just in the pursuit of totally staying on top of things, and making it work in what my interpretation of doing the job was. And it was, you don't ever get a break, you don't walk away. Even if you have the best team, you keep informed. of what's going on, it still takes up time. So part of me would be, I would have stepped back in a couple cases and, moved on post transition and started somebody, younger, wanting to get into the position sooner, before it was something that I was like, yeah, I have to go. I need to step away for a while. So I think that's it. I never took my limitations seriously. And I think that was it. I, Clint Eastwood tried to get through to me, but it never did.
Oh man. So Brent, you're doing a lot of things. You're going to a lot of conferences, meeting a lot of people. If folks want to connect with you, if folks want to find you, what's the best way to do so?
Yes, sir. So LinkedIn is a great way. All the information's there. Send a connection request, and also a lot of people reach out to me via our Charlotte ISSA website, and all the info stuff comes to myself and the board. And when there's a question and it's not relevant to the board itself, but to me, I'll carve that out and take it offline and get back with them.
Awesome, awesome. And actually, would love to take a moment here, a little bit of marketing for you, I suppose. The Charlotte ISSA, I hear a lot of great things. Give us a quick pitch on folks that are in the area. If they haven't joined, maybe why they should.
Yeah. So it's a non-accreditation body, so we're not ISC squared or ISACA. We have no requirement for you to renew each year, to keep your CISSP or System CISA. It's you join because you want to, but my flavor is open door content to anyone that's interested. So anyone that comes to our events, they don't necessarily have to be members, and we have perks that we can show love to our members with, but it's cyber professionals getting together, and it's open environment where we can collaborate. Nobody laughs at anyone. There is no stupid question. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask. But we want to do the betterment of the folks. We do hands-on workshops because we'd rather teach the fish than have somebody watch a slideshow on incident response. And you come away from it with knowledge. And when I had teams working for me, I always said, go to the event, do the networking, but come back with something tangible that you can show me. That's not a slide deck. Tell me what you learned. And that's what we try and deliver.
I love it. I love it. And I could say, so I used to be a member. I'm going to be a member again. I got to find some time. I used to be a member of the Milwaukee chapter up here in Wisconsin. Was always great. I got to meet a lot of fantastic people, and yeah. So for the listeners that are on here, if you're not a member of ISSA, you don't know anything about it, go take a look. Generally there are local chapters for everyone. Local may be a bit of a hike for some, depending on. I know it is for me here in Wisconsin. There's not a lot, but go take a look.
No, without question. And they're everywhere. I think there's 4 or 5 in North Carolina alone. So, if you can't find one, I'd be surprised, but, you can always ping me and I'll look up and see if there's one in your area.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Brent, thank you so much for joining me today. Really a pleasure having you on an episode.
Oh, my pleasure. This was a lot of fun, Ward. And I credit that to you. You just keep the flow solid. So thank you.
I really appreciate that. And big thank you to the audience. Really hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned something. Please tell others in your network to follow and listen. This has been another exciting episode of Guardians of the Data. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Guardians of the Data. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes and more, visit guardiansofthedata.show. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centro. To see how we help organizations discover and classify all of their data accurately and automatically while quickly achieving petabyte-scale data protection without the fuss, please visit centra.io. Catch you next time.